talking about navigating sticky situations as grant writers, because I know we make it look really easy and like we're just such pros and that we handle everything beautifully. But the reality is every grant has its own sticky twists and turns. And we wanted to talk about a lot of those so that when you're faced with those situations, if you are, I suppose, you'll know how to deal with it. So, see if I can change my slides. So today I just gave you the rundown. We're going to run through some. We're going to discuss some best practices for how you handle this. And then we'll open the floor to talk about sticky situations that you might have right now that you're trying to navigate and deal with, or that you've dealt with in the past. So I think most of you know who I am. I'm Meredith Noble. I'm that one, the redheaded one. We're actually even wearing the exact same outfit as we took in these pictures because we just filmed the video. Yeah. So I'm a grant writer. I've secured $42 million in grants and an author. I live out here in Valdez. And I guess when I'm not doing these things, I'm skiing or I'm biking. I had shoulder surgery, as many of you know, in July, and I had my first bike ride yesterday. So feeling really good about that. And then there's a new person on the block, and I'll let Alex introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex. I am a project manager and am serving as the director of operations for Learn Grant Writing. I'm so excited to have joined Meredith. And so I'm working remotely also in Valdez, Alaska. And when I'm not doing this, I'm probably doing yoga or hiking. So pretty stoked that we have a little bit of hiking season left before the snow comes.
Seriously. We are, I know many of you know that we're working in a tent. We moved out of the tent so it wouldn't look yellow for this video training, but we're going to stay as long as possible in the tent until there's too much snow. All right, so part of the inspiration, has anybody read this book? Say yes in the chat box if you have, Untamed by Glennon Doyle. So basically,
love that Brian has. Yes.
Nice. Brian,
so
stoked that you read it. Okay, so you know how the first chapter she talks about like I'm a cheetah, and so my boyfriend that's been helping me build the website, he's like, Meredith, what did he say? He said, I'm a cheetah or you're a cheetah? I think he said, I'm a cheetah. And I'm like, oh my gosh, have you been reading Untamed? Because I had it next to the bed. And he's like, no, you just have cheetahs on your shirt. I had cheetahs all over my shirt. But the reality is we really tapped into this book. It really opened up our minds to realizing like we need to be, I think when you're really raw and honest, we just have much more meaningful dialogue. And so that's what really inspired the content for today's presentation was let's just tell you all the messy things that have happened, particularly in the last 6 months when we kind of ramped up our consulting practice again, so that you can learn from some of those lessons with us. So the first one that you probably run into is how do you manage overwhelm? So a lot of times there's a lot of things that need to happen and you know all the things that need to be happened, but your team is overwhelmed and then they're not focusing on the right tasks or they're just spinning out and not getting it done. So has anyone had this happen where you're trying to get your team or people that need to help you do things but you're just feeling like everyone's really overwhelmed and then doesn't even know where to start? Maybe including yourself. Yeah. Carol saying all caps yes. So Ronnie might live in overwhelm. Yeah, totally.
Well, I hope this helps then, because we don't want you to live there for sure.
Yeah, don't get us wrong. We all visit the city of overwhelm from time to time, but times a million. Yeah, I mean, it's the struggle's real, right? But we can do things about it. Yeah. So first of all, you want to make sure, is this one you're talking about? No, it is. No, you are. You go for it. We forgot we split this up. Okay.
So make sure you have a handle on everything, which sounds a lot harder than it is. But as grant writers, we both live in the detail world and we can fly out and see that whole flight plan. And so we'll provide some tools in the next couple of slides to help you have a handle on everything. The second thing is to really triage those tasks. So we had a team member who was super overwhelmed, who was calling us after every team meeting with like 17 things that he was concerned about. And so we really had to go back to the drawing board and say like, okay, what does this team member really need to focus on so that he can see a roadmap of 1 to 2 things for the week and not feel like everything is happening all at once. So making sure that he had his tasks and other people had their tasks was really important. Yeah. And then to be the best project manager you can be.
which we're going to get into. So you all, I mean, this is sort of like a 101 back to everything we talk about in the preparing for success in grant writing from start to fund it, but I don't think it hurts to talk about it again because we always have to come back to the basics when we stray. So I'm going to let you talk about this because you're actually the reason we have this template. It was not for those of you that took the original course, this wasn't actually in there because we really discovered we needed it in May with a project that was absurdly complicated, had tons of moving parts. And so, yeah, do you want to talk about the checklist template?
Yeah. And so one of these tools that you can really have in your belt to combat overwhelm is a checklist. And what I love about it is that outlines one, all of the things that are in the funding guidelines. So you're making sure that you have every single piece of information that you will need to ultimately submit the grant. You also on this checklist have who's responsible and the date. So it's really, really easy for people to see, okay, I can do that this week, and then that other task I can do next week. And so I don't need to get overwhelmed yet about that other one because today I can just focus on this. And so, yeah, we need a lot of documents from our team members. And so this can be really, really helpful, especially when we're working with a larger team because they can see exactly what they themselves are responsible for.
Yeah, and the one thing about this checklist is that we find it kind of like bookends the process. Like you as the lead grant writer are going to develop it just so you feel like you've got a lay of the land and you've got your arms around it. And then you might get away from it and not really use it a ton. Like we use the calendar and we use our agenda to track everything that's happening, but it's not like we live in the checklist template. But where this thing really then comes in handy again is at the very end when you'll see two columns. One says access, one says ready for review, and then cutoff says approved. And so that access is where we would actually link to the Google Drive. Like here is the project abstract. It's linked, and then whoever's doing independent review can click on it, go read it, and then come back and say, check, it's ready. So it was a way of managing basically your quality control by going back to this checklist template. The other thing that this exposed, I know it seems so basic, but really it goes a long way. A lot of times you need a lot of signatures on documents, but you really don't need to wait until the last minute to get them done. So why not figure out what the pieces are that can just be done right now and go get those signatures done so that you don't have to worry about them at all. So that was something else that this checklist revealed. So the last point we'll make on this is just that if you yourself feel overwhelmed, then your team's going to feel it. And so it's really important that you get a handle on everything so that you're feeling more confident, because when you're confident, everyone else is going to feel that.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks Kathleen for the comment on loving the idea of including all your Google Doc links in one place. Truth. What if you don't have a team?
Such a good question.
So because Carol, you do have a team, but it's maybe you do 90%, you're the team, but no matter what, you still have to depend on others still at your community or in your tribe to help with who's doing the final review and approval of the narrative. Surely I would hope someone's helping with I don't know, getting the actual resolution passed and back to you. So you're not the tribal administrator, right? No, you run the environmental program. So in theory, your tribal administrator maybe would be also someone involved, right? So it might not be a huge team. It might be literally 3 people, but guarantee it's more than just you. And you want to be able to have a way to, just because also you're going to be burned out by the end of a proposal. You've done a lot of grants, you know this. And it's really important you've got somebody else that you're bouncing it off with that can do that final review.
And it also just keeps you organized if you are doing 90% of the work, right?
And accountable to deadlines.
Yeah.
Speaking of
to-do
which,
list.
Cue
schedule.
Cue schedule. Okay.
I love this schedule. And so we do this before our kickoff meeting to really outline everything that needs to happen. And so this template, I love it because you get to check things off. It automatically fills in your dates for you. So it's just really, really great. And it also allows us to figure out what needs to be prioritized for that week. So like that story we were telling you about the overwhelmed team member, we realized that we were giving him in our agenda a lot of things that needed to be done throughout the whole grant and not just focusing on the 2 to 3 things that he needed to do that week. And so for example, after we scheduled our weekly recurring meetings, we knew that we could talk about letters of support at that first meeting and really focus that first week on only letters of support. And so you can do that when you schedule out all of the different deadlines throughout the grant project.
Yeah, so how many, I mean, I know that we're split with the people that are calling in that are not a part of grant writing from start to funded, and then people that are. So like Carol, have you used this schedule at all? Or has anybody that's in the course gone and tried to actually set up their tasks using this calendar? Not yet. You'll be so excited when you do. We love it. This is actually, yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways to organize it. It's not like you've got to use any one which way. But one thing we learned so I think a lot of you know there was so much demand for grant funding with CARES Act that we ramped up and hired a bunch of students. And one thing that we realized was like everyone kind of has some of their own processes that they do, but that becomes really messy when you're sharing and collaborating across each other. So it's so helpful when you just have a process and everyone uses the same templates, and then it's super easy when you're sharing things or even just doing work, 5 projects a year. It's the same process throughout it. So we love this thing and we use it a lot. This is actually a screen grab from a real grant application we did in May.
Yeah. And so you'll actually see that now that we're looking at the agenda, that at the bottom of that agenda is the full schedule. And so I link to it in every single agenda that we have, because we can always go back to it and look at what we're doing this week. But anyway, I got ahead of myself. So this is our agenda template. We love this for keeping organized because at our every weekly recurring meeting, we use the same exact Google Doc. And so you can find the agenda and the minutes from every single previous meeting in that one document, which we think is really, really helpful. It also, you can see on the side that I've tagged people for whose responsibility that is. So it's another way of keeping us accountable, right? I can go in there and I can check it off after I've done it. We also use a project management system for many of these tasks. And so after these meetings, I will go in and use Asana, or I would encourage you to look at a bunch of project management softwares because there's a lot out there, like a Trello or a Monday, but you can add the tasks directly in after the meeting, and it makes it so easy to keep track of what you're doing, and if you have team members, what they're doing.
And a little plug for Asana is that when you complete tasks, a unicorn shoots across the screen. So pretty much when they did that, I was like, sold. We'll totally use this software and stop using Post-its. But yeah, so Jordan, to answer your question, is there a template for this? Yes, we actually just updated the meeting agenda template that we did have in the course to one that looks just like this, which I think actually where did we talk about? Don't we have that? I thought we'd go to this. Do we go to the slides?
Yeah.
All right, we'll get to it later, but we do have it, and it's well, actually, I think this rolling meeting agenda minute should be on the free templates page. So I need to go update that. So I'll take care of it after this, but where you can actually get access to that from the free resources page. But it's also just a part of the course curriculum, and it's in there, updated and improved.
Yeah.
So Anna also thought that the first time she saw an Asana unicorn. I know, and they have narwhals. I was like, literally, this is the best product. Which, fun fact, we did add some things like that to the new website. So I don't want to like spoil it, but
be on the lookout.
But be on the lookout. If you sign up for something cool might happen on your screen. Yeah, gold. It's very fun. Okay, so let's see, we should talk about this one too. So not sticking to deadlines, this just kind of segues into that last topic. Well, so let's say you are being a great project manager, you're not giving people too much work, it's like very clear what you're asking for, and people are just missing their deadlines. They're just not getting it to you. Has anyone had this happen where you're depending on people to contribute information and they're not sticking to deadlines? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like, who hasn't? Yeah, thank you, Anna. It is. Thank you for linking that. I need to just go update it because I think that's the old agenda template, but it is the same concept. Aesthetically, it just looks different, but thank you. I will go update it. Okay. So the struggle's real. And I'm going to share a story that I just had an interview with Anna. That's the redhead that I look like I'm sisters with, on the left. So she works for an engineering firm, and they don't obviously like to write grants. And so, but she doesn't understand the technical language. So she has to get them to give that to her, but they really don't want to just sit down and like write out this narrative content. So what she would do is she will go to them after, like, there's no more deadline give, like you have to give it to me. And she'll say, look, I'm not leaving. I'll help you. I can type it out if you can just say it, but I just need you to just stop and do this now, because I'm not leaving until you do. Nice, kind of firm, like just not, just really insisting on it. And that's how she gets the information when she really needs it. Another technique that I also learned when I was doing this is to bring a recorder or just use your phone and say, look, I know you've got all this stuff in your head, but I need to get it out. And I know you're not going to take the time to write it. So I'm just going to set my phone here and ask you questions, and they're going to talk, and you're going to have all that language that you need for the grant narrative. And you can go back and listen to it. So you don't have to try to take notes. You'll have all that language. You can use a tool. I hear like Dragon as a software will convert audio to text, but there's literally tons of cheap software that does that, or you can just listen to it for free. And just what I have observed is that if you let your deadline slip in the beginning of the project, it will continue to happen for the life of the project. So being a real stickler at the very beginning is critical because you can always lighten up, but you can't get more strict usually, right?
Right.
So it's good to just, and I think that this is, I don't know, it's just hard. I'll be honest, like I have a personality type that doesn't do very well with like insisting on deadlines from other people. I have my own hardcore deadlines I keep myself to, but I don't do a good job with others and I let them slip. And that's one thing that's been nice about having Alex here is we can split the good cop, bad cop. So she's really good on insisting and actually tracking on deadlines. And so, yeah, it's just something that takes some personal work depending on your personality type, but being aware that it's really important that you insist on deadlines and keep everyone to them, including yourself. Desperate times. What do? You put on a unicorn outfit and you get some wine. Just kidding. You might. Who was at the webinar where Lucas crashed it in a unicorn outfit? I don't know. That was back in April. I don't know if anyone here was on that one, but it was awesome. He would probably hate that I put this in all my webinars, but I just think it's really funny. I was trying to stick to a deadline and I was going to work late that night until I got it done, and he came to help me, cheer me on through it. But really, what happens when you're struggling to get, like, people just aren't giving you the content? Like you've been a stickler, you're saying like, let's do this. What happens? I just want you to know you can stop work on a grant application. And I think people forget that that's an option. And so this is how this lesson was learned. So last January, one of our teammates, Tara, was writing a grant application. And I told her, I'm like, look, I'm launching my online course. Like, I am doing all these live workshops. Like, I'm not going to have time to be very engaged. Like, I need you to just really own this. And so I kind of put her out on her own. And it was our first project we were working on together. And it turns out she was not getting any support from the client. I mean, he was just not getting her the materials he needed, and the stuff he did give her was bogus, which segues to another story I'll share in a little bit. And what I didn't realize at the end, and it ended up being just this kind of bad application because she just didn't have the inputs to do the work. And what I learned after that was she didn't know that she could tell me, this is not going well. I really think we should just stop working on this because we're just wasting the client's money to pursue this when no one is putting in the effort to do it. And so she didn't know that she could stop it, that she had permission to stop work. So anyone that's worked in safety in a company, you might also have encountered where like you have permission to stop work if you observe things like a safety protocol being missed. Like, you need to feel empowered to stop something if you're not. And sometimes even just threatening to stop work on a grant application is all it takes to get people's butt into gear. So I guess just to share one more personal story is Carol, no, the other Carol. Anyway, for some of you might have remembered that we had one really lame webinar that I always have really high standards for our webinars, and this one was bad. And I realized that I felt like I was kind of stuck with the person that I had brought on as a guest speaker, even though right before the webinar was about to start, I just had this terrible feeling in my gut. And I should have had the confidence to just say, no, you're not presenting. You're a total loser. We're done. I can just literally teach something else that'll be of higher value on the spot than you're going to do. And I wish I had had the confidence to realize, like, I could just stop this. But I think sometimes we forget that you can do that. So does that make sense? I'm hoping that this point is resonating, that like, if you are working really, really hard, but people on your team aren't, you can stop the work. So that's that point.
Awesome.
Okay.
And to a much more boring point.
Document control.
And I think this is my biggest fear, right?
Yeah.
Is that one, that we will waste time on a document that isn't the most up to date, but more that my teammates are going to waste time on a document that isn't up to date. And so we use Google Docs, but there's lots of ways to work around this.
Yeah, so we'll get into that one. And Ronnie, thank you. When I care more than you care, we're not working together.
Yeah, I love
so good.
that.
So good.
Yeah. And so huge in the editing phase.
Yeah, Anna really probably has had her fair share of nightmares with this, I'm going to guess. She is a world-class copy editor, so if anybody needs editing and they want to hire her to do edits for their grant application, Anna Nelson is your girl. Okay.
It's so true. So a couple of best practices that we use, we have a consistent folder structure, which we'll show you in a second.
Yeah.
We use the same templates. So really easy, right? We have a resolution template. We don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time we need to do a resolution. Just use that same template. We all know how to edit it because we've all seen it a million times. And it saves you time on the back end that you could spend on other things. So and then we really use a collaborative workspace like a Google Docs, Microsoft Teams, I think will do it. And then SharePoint is another Microsoft feature that I've worked in that allows people to be in there and just really collaborate and co-create together. So here's that file structure. And this is where we'll show you where those templates are now saved if you are in the course.
Yeah, so especially for those of you that took the first version, this was feedback from you, was that we had all these things linkable when you were in the course, but they weren't all in one place. And I think it was actually Ronnie, you were the one that went and made your own folder structure, putting them all in one place. I think this is why we did this, because you had just recreated it. So we're like, well, probably other people want it too. So let's see. So I can run through a little bit of this. Yeah. We can tag team it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the project management folder has the sample folder structure. So if you just want to have that by you when you go and recreate your own version, it makes it a little easier. We also parked the project planning toolkit in here in case you're looking for it. And just a general agendas are there. Like, this is thinking about the entire project in its whole, not a specific grant application. It's like, we want to get this whole thing funded, and then this would be your folders for that. So funding research. Oh, I went too far forward. Well, anyway, this is the funding strategy. So here's a couple sample prospectuses in the funding strategy template. You guys know that we talk about that. And then funding research. Here's the guide to how, basically it's really nice to just have that guide right by you when you're going through the process of trying to decide what grants to go after. But the ones we're really concerned with today are here. So in the grant applications folder, go to grant folder 1. So basically you would have any specific grant that you're pursuing would have its own like this folder structure into itself. So that anytime you want to go be like, oh, what about that Department of Energy grant I had done? You can just go right into there and it's all in its own spot. So they each get their own folder. I know it seems like we're going long with folders, but that's what we do. So do you want to talk through this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is where we'll find the agenda. And I think it's really helpful because now all of my team members know that where I'm going to save, because I'm the project manager for our grants that we're working on. And so they know where I'm going to save the agenda. And so if for whatever reason I'm out of pocket and they need to find it and they can't find the link in their emails, they can always go into the project management folder and they know that that's where we've saved it. So here's that kickoff agenda template that we had referenced in the slide.
I think you can click here to go back to it. Yeah.
Okay. So you'll see that one that's editable. You'll also see the checklist in here as well as the schedule. And then we have another grant agenda template if you like.
We're going to get rid of it. We're just going to, I haven't done it yet, to link on the free resources page, but
yeah,
now I have to do it because we made a commitment. Fine.
And then the debrief agenda for when that grant is done, and you can go through with your team and say like what worked and what could have gone better.
Yeah, 100%. And then blank templates, you know where that means just putting in your application. If it has blank templates, the draft narrative, I think draft attachments is really where some of the meaty stuff is.
Yeah. And specifically, I love the things that we provide in the letters of support.
Yeah.
I think it keeps the letters of support process really simple. So again, we can go in and say, yep, here, we're going to make a copy of this letter of support Excel spreadsheet and give that to our team member who's in charge of collecting the letters of support, and they can fill in all of the names, etc.
Yeah, so I don't think we need to go through it all because you can just go watch the video on it, but just thought we'd give that as a background on like every single project we do has this exact same folder structure. So do whatever folder structure you want, but choose something that's consistent and get everyone on your team to use it, because you will surprise yourself at how often you go back looking for really old grant applications. Like we're working on one right now where I had done the same grant application form probably 6 years ago. So went way back into my old work folders, found it because I used pretty much the same structure even back then, and was able to actually find it and give it to her. Whereas most people would never be able to find something like that. It was too long ago and it wasn't organized. So it's really important to know just have a consistent structure. So any questions on that? Advice, file first. So true.
So true.
Oh yeah. Wait, are we in full screen? I think we are. Okay.
Cool. And then we also just hate being in our email. No.
Yeah, pretty much. Hate email.
So we don't think it allows for really deep work, and we try to do deep work a lot. And so we love Slack because one, it lets us ask simple questions easier, right? It's like texting instead of emailing. And so it takes care of a lot of emails that would have regularly been sent. And we can also do cute things like send words of encouragement when our fellow teammates are stuck in a grants.gov nightmare.
Shout out, because Alexis is on the phone right now. So Alexis just turned in 2 huge grant applications on Friday and on Monday. This is actually not a point I made, but we should make it, the whole deadline thing. Okay, so in our calendar, we teach that you want to be turning in your grant at least 2 days early. So the deadline was Monday, but game plan was turning them in on Friday. So technically 4 days early. And thank goodness, because grants.gov was a total nightmare. And Alexis had that wiggle room to actually figure it out, and then got it in on the day of the deadline, but it totally wouldn't have worked had she planned to submit on Monday.
Yeah.
And so Alexis doesn't know this yet, but something really awesome is heading her way to thank her for being so awesome. And we also send lots of random gifts. Actually, we don't. Alex does. So anyway, good work. I do whatever you want to use in your organization. Great. I think it just goes a really long way to have tools that you can build culture with, but also, just manage your workload better.
Mm-hmm. It helps decrease the overwhelm in all of us.
Yeah, seriously. All right. So scope creep. Who's had this happen? The team will not pin down your scope of work, and the grant deadline is getting closer and closer, and you are freaking out. Anybody? Yeah, maybe a time or two. So this is a really common struggle, and we're going to talk through it. All right, so I wanted to share this because Thema, who you'll see her, this is a picture from her work. She's just an amazing, just total world class artist, and she took our course, and she said she's applied for 4 grants since she took it, and she's heard back from 2, and 1 she didn't get, and one she's waiting to hear back. So she won 2. Anyway, the one she did not win, at the last minute, they decided to add all of this extra scope. So they made it from this like one clear project and made it way bigger and way more complex. It was essentially 3 projects. And the funder said, sorry, we're not funding you on this because like it's just too much work. It's not that it's too much work, it's just it's too all over the place. We want to fund one thing and know that you're going to do it really well. So that was a big takeaway for her, was don't let that last minute scope creep happen. The second story I'll share, I think it was with Bonnie, but I don't have it here. Maybe I share it later. Anyway, also another student in the program, but she's up in the mountains in Oregon right now vacationing, which is great. So, but she had the same problem with, it had worked for her, the nonprofit she's working with, to have a last minute scope expansion, and they did get funded. So it almost reinforced that was an appropriate behavior, which kind of makes me think about, like, I'm a backcountry skier, and you can do a lot of risky things that then make you think it's okay, even though it's like, well, really, you just kind of got lucky and didn't get killed in an avalanche. But it wasn't a little dramatic of an analogy, but you get the point. Like, just because you're doing habits that aren't well or very in your best interest in the long term, and you can get away with it a little bit, it doesn't work as a strategy for the long term. So your responsibility here is that as a project manager, you need to be managing when decisions have to be made and when there are clear cutoff points that no more changes to the scope can happen. So we had this debate like last week because we had a project that the client had so much heart and soul in what he was doing and believes in it so much, but he would call our grant writer at all hours of the day and want to talk for 2 or 3 hours, no joke, to kind of work through it. And that is the nature of grant applications. They can accelerate all this healthy project planning and creative process, which we're all about. But there came a point where, I mean, she called us in tears because he wanted to do another 180-degree flip
2 days before the deadline.
2 days before the grant deadline. Yeah. And that's just, and she was trying to think of like how she would do that. And we were like, no. Like, no, we will be the bad cop, but you don't change the scope this late in the game, because that's how we make mistakes. Then it's not, coming through your grant budget gets changed, right? Like everything goes to chaos. We need to just, at some point, the creative process stops and we're committing to the scope of work. And if we can't get to that point, then table the grant and apply next year at the next cycle.
Yeah. And I think that I know some of you are working by yourselves, but even if there's a supervisor or someone in your team who can be that bad cop, I think the beauty of this relationship that our grant writer had with this client was that he trusted her so much that like actually having her be the bad cop in that situation could have been detrimental. And so that's where it was really awesome that her and I could work together, because as soon as he started going off track in the meeting, I was like, the deadline is in 2 days and we don't have time for that. And so it didn't detract from the trust he had built with her, and it allowed me to kind of be the bad cop. So if there's someone in your work environment that you can do that with on those more sensitive projects, I would look for that person.
The other way that we've handled that in the past is I've had students even email me for their opinion on it because they were stuck, and then I gave them back that, firm bad cop opinion, and they were able to use that as their leverage. So if you posted in the Facebook community group saying, hey, here's my situation, how should I handle it? Like, we can give you the advice on it, even if maybe you know what you need to do. And then you could take that back, be like, hey, I took this to my, the professional grant writing coaches, and this is the advice that they offered. We need to stop doing this and move forward with that, or whatever. So definitely use that as a tool if you feel like you really need it. And we're here to help you out navigating that situation.
Awesome. I'm glad you have a great bad cop in your back pocket,
Yeah,
Carol.
everybody needs one. I am the bad cop most days. All right. So, why this matters. I think we already talked about this, the advice from Thema, but it's really important to focus around one project at a time because you just cannot develop your budget and your narrative, etc., if you have lots of things going on. So, just a fun fact, has anyone read The One Thing, the book The One Thing? Kind of a cheesy read, but the lesson has stuck with me forever. The word priority means the most important thing, and you can't have many most important things. There can only be one most important thing, right? So we start our day with declaring to each other our three priorities via Slack. Tell them our three priorities. I just goofed up my own thing. You can't have three priorities, we tell it the three tasks we're doing, but the first one is the priority for the day. There we go. That's what I meant to say. So if you haven't read that book, check it out. Another thing that you can do that'll help you navigate this situation if it happens to you is go back to your project planning toolkit. So getting in here and just using this as a guide to making sure that you're fleshing out the scope of the work, who's doing what, who are we serving, how are we measuring the impact, all of that's in there. And if you can get that whole thing filled out first while you're in that ideation phase, then it's going to be a lot more easier when you make that transition to saying, like, okay, at this point, we're now committed to the grant writing phase and we're not going to be all over the place. You good with that?
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, this is another really awesome way to back into your scope. This is one of my go-to strategies. So first of all, what you're going to do is you're going to figure out how much should you be applying for. So a lot of times a grant application I guess I'm going to use this one with Alexis that she just did. So she just did a housing grant application for the native village of Koyukuk. And I think we could apply for up to $1 million, if I remember. But realistically, when she looked at the average grant award, it's not $1 million, it's something smaller. It was maybe around 600,000. So when okay, we should apply somewhere around 600 grand, that's the number we want to come in at. Then you go and figure out your unit costs for the project. So what's it going to cost to renovate and make a healthy home? So what's a new roof? What's the new foundation? What is mold remediation? Like a cost for one of those. So we worked with this housing expert guy and just asked him to give us literally back of the napkin estimates, but then we knew, like, okay, so a roof repair is $12,000 or whatever it was. So now I know my unit costs and now I know my total amount. So I can actually back into it by starting to figure out, well, okay, can I have 5 homes? Can I do 10? When you're also factoring in the labor and how many, the other costs that roll into this. And when you use this budget template and you use it over and over and over, it gets really and you get comfortable using it, you'll see how you can start kind of experimenting with, well, what can we actually afford to do within this $600,000 budget by knowing our unit costs and backing into it. Does that make sense? Like that strategy for figuring out your budget, and then you know what you can do. Then you know your scope of work. Then even though everyone wants you to do 50 homes, you'll say, I'm sorry, we can actually only fund 20, so let's focus on that. So that's one of my favorite techniques for developing a budget and developing a scope of work quickly and just not going around and around. Key takeaways on this topic. So it's okay to navigate the scope and explore possibilities, because the thing about grant writing is that often it is sort of just an idea. We'll be honest, that's what happens. But there is a window and there's a phase for that. And then there's a phase where that doesn't happen. And in our general rule of thumb is that it's not okay to be messing around with the scope of work less than 10 days before the deadline. Because if you're doing this right, you actually took this to the funder ahead of time and kind of pre-vetted that they support this application and what you propose to do in the funding research phase. So obviously you're not going to change it because you've already got their buy-in, right?
Yeah.
And then be assertive if you have to be. So fun. Okay. So who's had this happen? your leader or whoever needs to review the grant application, like the head honcho, has got to give it a final blessing. And you give it to them because it's finally all done. And then they want to make a ton of changes at the 11th hour. Anybody? Yeah. It's a
We've been
thing.
there.
It's a thing. We've had that happen. So how we had this happen was on a grant application in May, and we were triaging basically. Like this applicant was so busy and so overworked that instead of insisting that she read the narrative earlier, like we would have typically given it at least a week in advance for a full review for content, we let that slide because she was just so busy that we were like, okay, just get the resolution, just get the letters of support, like just get the stuff we can't do.
Yeah.
And so we let it slide. And we thought we were on the same page because we had good weekly syncs and everything. But when she got in there and she just went ham on changing the language in the narrative when we thought it was done, like done, ready to be submitted. And what else would I add about that? And it just created a lot of stress for everybody, as you can imagine. And frankly, it was kind of our fault because we had not given her this proposal and insisted that she made the time to look at it before it was the 11th hour. Turns out it all worked out great, and we talked through it together and got the whole thing cleaned up quickly. But here's our advice on that. You want to talk about it?
So basically, same advice as we spoke about earlier, that 2-day wiggle room before the grant is due is critical because this was right when COVID hit, and she was working in a native area, and there was a lot of details to be worked out. And so, and then the day that the grant was like, when she was making all these changes, her internet actually cut out. She wasn't able to go to the office because of COVID, and she had to stay at home. And so there's always things that happen that are even outside of the control. And so having that wiggle room, I think, is really, really critical. And then give a 1-week warning to the reviewer so you can actually add review time to their calendar. So send them a calendar invite and say, like, for this hour, I see that it's free on your calendar. I've checked with your assistant. You have to review this grant. And if you can do that 3 weeks in advance, it becomes a part of their schedule. And then they have time to review it.
Yeah, so that's just a big one, is giving people a heads up so they're blocking the time. All right, so this one's now let's talk about sticky, you guys. Dealing with peer pressure. So this is the Bonnie story. So what happens when you're told, well, just copy and paste from this old grant application, or you've had other instances. Has anyone had this where you've been pressured to do work that you feel is below your own personal and professional standards? Kurt. I always plan a submission about a week to 10 days before a deadline. Yes. It always seems like someone has a last minute, I can't talk, impediment. Yes. Awesome.
Yeah.
I think that's what we all need to strive for, is getting it way out in advance of the 2 days. Because it's true, I don't know why people feel like they have to go right up against the deadline like it's a badge of honor almost, but it's not. So yeah, earlier, definitely the better. I did have, yours is 3 weeks early. That's awesome, Carol.
Wow.
I love that standard. That is super awesome.
That is cool.
That's way cool. Way cool. You're definitely doing your best work when that's how it happens. So really cool.
Very inspiring.
So yeah, Bonnie is a student in the program, and she was saying that she was just getting all of this pressure to just copy and paste the application. Never mind that other application wasn't successful. Never mind that actually they're having to do a lot of rebuilding with kind of trust with these foundations, because they did put forth very poor work, and now those foundations don't really want to consider them anymore for funding. So she's having to do a lot of cleanup, and she's like, well, why are you paying me to do it then if you want it just to be copied and paste? So that's a common situation you might run into. Another one I ran into that was probably the most sticky ethical situation was this grant application the person that was saying that they would be the lead project manager was actually going to have nothing to do with the project. And he's like, well, you can just use my resume and you can just put it on there. We'll just like fluff this up and fluff that, like just lie in the application is basically what I was told. And we'll just figure it out once we're funded. And I felt super uncomfortable with that because that's not actually how the project's getting implemented. And then worse yet, like they don't actually have a plan for how this will be managed well. So I documented all of it, and then called off the work and said, we're just not doing this. Like, we're not going to apply for this if you don't have a really good plan, and we're going to be doing it in a really lame way. Like, it just doesn't meet our standards. So if you ever run into a situation like this, at the end of the day, you can push back respectfully. You don't have to like call it off necessarily. You might be able to push back and say, no, I expect higher standards, and you can get them. But also feel like you need to stand strong in your values. That's why it's important to know what your values are, so that when you're up against a really tough decision, you can lean on them and it'll help you figure out what way to go. And then the other thing is just listen to your intuition. Sometimes it's not logical why you feel a way that you feel. You don't have necessarily like lots of good evidence or reasons, but if you feel it in your gut, then it's real. And so listen to your intuition when you're developing a project so you feel really good about it. Because it's not just your organization's reputation, it's your own personal reputation as a grant writer. And when you do everything you can to protect it and do only really great work, you will have no problems finding lots of opportunities in the grant writing world. Mm-hmm. Okay, how about this one? Who's run into this problem? Funder politics. So a funder tells you to do one thing, and then you've got this other funder that says do something else, and you're just like, what do I do? Here's a story from a student recently as well. So Alyssa London is the founder of Culture Story, and she has been, she's actually a for-profit business, but she's partnered with FNX, a LA-based media company that's a nonprofit, to be her fiscal sponsor. And the challenge that she's been running into is that she's trying to navigate all of these different funders and piece together how do they fit in, and but they all want her to do very specific things that in many ways sometimes really change the direction of like her vision and what she wants to do. Other times they're really great suggestions. But it's making it very complicated for her to like figure out where do these puzzle pieces go so I can actually get this whole thing funded. And so when this happens to you, the advice that we have, I think I actually talk about it. Yes, I do. So anyway, I'll talk about the advice in a hot second. The other example I'll give is one of my very first projects was getting a clinic funded, and I had no idea this one funder, it was like the last one we really wanted to get $500,000 from, and we'll close our funding gap. And we did everything that they told us to do, like redid the whole business plan. I mean, everything. And we still were not successful getting funded. And I could not figure out why. I was like, gosh, we did every single thing they told us to do, and it cost a lot of money. It took a lot of time. To come and find out that the funder didn't like the president of the client. They had this long standing issue, and respect, didn't lack respect between each other. So no matter what amount of work I did, it didn't really matter because that was their baggage that was outside of my control. And sometimes that's going to happen to you. And it's very frustrating because you don't necessarily know what's going on when you're in the thick of it, but just recognize like it's not personal. You did great work. Sometimes there's things that just go beyond you. So how you can handle this in terms of at least minimizing it is always have more than one contact per funding agency. So building your relationships with the key funding agencies you want to work with is super critical, and then having more than one person ideally, so you can make sure you're not just getting their one opinion just in case it's a little off from how the agency really wants them to think and believe. And then another strategy we use is we'll actually bring our funding strategy to, that roadmap with the 2 to 5 grants that we want to pursue and in what order, and we'll bring it to the funder and ask them for their feedback. So if we're like, hey, we think that you are going to be our third funder that we'll pursue. So we'll go pursue these two first. But if we get you in, then we think we can definitely go get that big tough national grant. What do you think about our strategy? And when people see that you're leveraging more than just one grant, and you've got this whole plan and you're asking for their feedback, they can help you figure out the timing on it, and they know those other funders. So you might be able to say, hey, could you give me an introduction to this funder? Because they're seeing the whole picture of how you're going to get this thing funded. I hope that makes sense. And then the other pro tip here is that you want to find others that have been funded by that organization and ask them to basically be, a one-time mentor or mentor you would as you're working on a specific project, because they're going to have a lot of that kind of inside data that they can help you with. People work together pretty well, I'd say. We're a big believer in being very transparent and sharing knowledge freely. So that's another strategy as well. So that is all of our top sticky situations.
Had a lot in the last 6 months.
Yeah, they've been super fun. But what sticky situations have you encountered? Throw those in the group chat. We'd love to hear if you've had some that you've had to run into and how you navigated them, or maybe ones that you're dealing with right now. We would just love to hear where you're at with sticky situations. No sticky situations for you guys, I guess, just for us suffering. It's okay.
They can unmute themselves.
Oh yeah, you can also definitely unmute yourselves, because we're a really small group today, since I managed to not know how to send an email with Zoom. So
feel free to unmute yourself and say hi and tell us a story.
Yeah, definitely. I think these are they're going to happen to you, whether they haven't happened yet, or I think, where is Kathleen? It feels like, Kathleen, you are like definitely nodding your head to a lot of these. So curious if you have had any of these experiences yourself too.
Hi.
Hey.
Yeah, I have. I'm a volunteer grant writer, and I'm pretty new to this. One sticky situation I found was my supervisor actually likes to keep the executive director out of the loop intentionally until like the later stages of a project, because she's really that kind of bad cop figure. So he's like, let's not let her in on it until it looks all polished and ready. But then once we got to that stage, the executive director was like, not on board. So I realized we should have had a kickoff meeting that included the executive director. Mm-hmm. And we're just starting another one, and I did a kickoff meeting, and I think that's helping a lot.
Awesome.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, your situation is we can empathize with, because if you're working with someone and that's what they advise and want, you're like, well, okay. But what you're learning is you need to be guiding it as a project manager, as the expert on the grant, and say, look, I just don't want us to do all this work and then find out that we were off base. We're just going to make sure they don't have to be in the grant and into the nitty details, but let's just make sure we're on the same page. It's how I operate on everything I do. And you just make it like, this is how it's done. So it's not really something to negotiate.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah. That's a good sticky situation.
Okay.
Sweet. Does anyone else have any?
Can you see me?
Oh, wait a minute. Angela, is that you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have a sticky situation, but since it's a small group, my situation is that my husband and I have had a nonprofit performing arts school for 38 years. We've never turned any kids away. So we've spent between $25,000 and $30,000 a year out of our own pockets, and so I make no money. He has a construction company, and I've had all these years, like 12 or 14 people promise to write grants for us, and nobody's going to do it. So I'm learning how to write grants for myself. We're actually a Texas corporation that we've been in New Hampshire for the last 15 years. We're just getting reincorporated in the state of New Hampshire. So what I'm trying to do right now is learn how to write all these grants. I can't qualify for them yet until I'm actually, been reincorporated, because we actually changed our name. We're doing a DBA. I've read the books. I've been studying stuff. I've fallen every time there's a free um, uh, webinar, I sign up for it because I want to learn how to do it. And so I just wonder, one of my biggest questions is how, and right now I just filed for unemployment because of COVID. Our studio is just about to open back up. I could only have 6 kids in one room and 4 kids in another room. So I'm a volunteer for my own company, and that's been another nightmare. My full-time job is applying for unemployment.
Yeah, sounds like
And
a
trying
lot.
to, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
So my question is, how do I find grants without having to go to all these places want to charge you money, to help you find grants easier. Do you have any advice for me to help me, get going, and where can I find free grants that I'm not going to spend a whole ton of time wasting my time on? Does that make any sense to you whatsoever?
Yeah, so lots of advice in there. 3 things come to mind. One, you don't have to wait until you have your documents technically, because you could find another organization that could be your fiscal sponsor for these first year or 2. So if you found
Okay.
another organization in New Hampshire that has mission alignment, a lot of times there's certain organizations that is what they do, like community-based nonprofits. They will bring in kind of nascent nonprofits or groups that are kind of getting on their feet, and they will provide the grant administration and the 501c3 status. So that's something you might consider, because it'll also give you a little bit more like credibility to stand on than just being.
Well,
Go ahead.
we are 501c3 educational, and
Oh,
we have been. We're
okay.
just we're a foreign nonprofit from Texas in the state of New Hampshire,
Okay.
because that was
Got
the
it.
cheapest way for us to do it.
Okay.
Now we're about to be a New Hampshire, but we have been
Okay.
501c3 educational for years.
Okay, awesome, cool, thank you. Sorry, I didn't follow on that. But okay, so in terms of, yeah, how do I find the right grants? So this is literally my passion topic, which is the whole point of module 2 on funding strategy, because you can shotgun it, but it's better to just go through that funnel research process and get it down to the 2 to 5 grants that you're going to pursue this year. And when you know what those are, and you go through a process where you confirm you have good odds of success, and like you vetted it with the funder, then it's not like you might put in more work on one application, but you know that you've done your homework and you've got really good chance of winning it, which is way better approach than just like shotgunning it and like seeing what sticks.
Okay.
So in terms of like the grant database process, I mean, obviously, so probably like the free method you can use is go find similar organizations to your own online, and then research how they've been funded, including just reaching out to them and asking them.
Okay, that's great.
So getting on, I mean, you can get fairly far using Google to research, not like Googling grants that won't be effective. But if you search more like, researching what others have done, that goes well. And then we are next week publishing an article on the top 10 grant databases that we've done a whole deep dive on. In fact, Alexis, who's on the phone, did all the work for that, which was really awesome. And we still, even after doing that, recommend Instrumental, which is not free. It's $75 a month, so it's definitely expensive. But one thing that's nice is you can turn it on and you can turn it off. So if you're like, I want to do 4 weeks of really intensive grant research and do it fast and efficient, then do it for a month, and then you can always turn your membership off. And if you turn it on again 6 months from now, all your stuff will still be there. So that's a nice way to kind of bootstrap it until you feel like you've got enough to support, paying for a membership ongoing. But that is hands down the fastest way to get. I mean, in instant search, you'll have 100 grants, like literally in a 10-minute search, and then we teach you how to actually filter those to get to the best ones. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. It's just like I said, right now I'm just trying to get the rent paid so I don't lose the studio.
Yes.
So there's no $75 at this point unless I can maybe find someone that might be willing to donate that. But that's good to know. Thank
The
you.
other thing is you technically can get a 2-week trial set up and hustle.
Okay. All right.
I mean, I'm all about, I want to support them because they're such a great organization, but there's always a way to bootstrap it and still, you know, get to know that software and get a lot of work done still within the trial period. Kathleen made another good point that is totally true. A lot of times the public libraries and universities will have free access to grant search databases. So you could go see if your own library card could get you access to that.
Okay.
So yeah, that's something that I did when I first got started, but I've just come to the point where I really like instrumental and that's what we use. But
Yeah, I saw that on that in that episode that you did. But I was just trying to see if there's, and I would love it if you know, my whole goal is, you know, if we get our first grant, then let some of that money go to paying for things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
My final question is, because we're nonprofit, also, well, everybody is, I guess, because we're trying to get grants. But do you have any? Would they be any students that might be wanting to get some time working with an organization like mine, or getting class credit or something like that? Is that something that might be a possibility?
Yeah, so often we have people that sign up for the course that don't have a specific project in mind. And so when we find out what their interests are, when they introduce themselves, we'll match them because we have a pretty good handle on what people are doing. And so we can help pair them up so that they can work on a real world project. So that probably accounts for, I don't know, 30% or so of the people, maybe more, don't have a specific project in mind. They're just trying to develop the technical skill set. And then we help them get, you know, matched up with someone to kind of build up their either they're trying to build up their portfolio and just have some wins under their belt to go land a new job, or to start their own grant writing consulting business.
Okay. Do you ever so if I sent you an email, you know, basically asking for something like that, and somebody comes along, would you send them my way, or how does that work?
We usually do it just, I mean, to manage it, we do it for people that are in the course, Grant Writing from Start to Funded, because that's how I have that, we have that private Facebook group so we can actually link people. But yeah, we should just stay in touch and we can try to figure something out to help you out.
Send us an email.
Okay.
We can follow up.
Send Alex an email. I hate emails.
Send Alex. Send me an email.
Well, I've been talking a long time, so thank you.
No, it's good. It's all good. We like to connect,
Yep.
which makes it actually, it's like killing me. I'm like, Kathleen, I haven't responded to your email. I'm sorry. I'm going to. I have a response. I just wish I could, I just want to video record. Be like, here's my response, and then send it. But it ends up not being that easy to do fast, and there needs to be a better way. If I could just send emails via recording, I would do that all day long. So. Oh, funny. Okay, you guys are awesome. Does anyone else have any thoughts, questions, hopes, dreams? Just kidding. Anything you wanted to share?
Hey, Mayor, can I say something?
Heck yeah, Carol. Let's hear. Oh, wait, not Carol. Where are you?
It's Ronnie.
Yeah, I thought, okay, hi.
So I have to say, one of the most painful things that I've run into is those executives that are super overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Just me, it's them. They, you know, everything was on track. And I asked them, can you please check your logins for these websites? Because the submission at federal grants, it can't, I wasn't authorized. Right at the brink, because everything was at the brink on one of these that I was working on. They hadn't checked their logins, and they'd expired, and they needed, you know, password changes, and it was very tense. And that was an 11 o'clock night for me, and I really swore that I was not going. In fact, my team, I talked to them. We're going to be organized, and we're not going to work on this to, you know, crazy hours. And that was crazy hours. It was very tense. So I would just say, if your executives who you're working with won't check logins on their own, it is worth sitting down next to them, looking at the same computer screen and making them go through the steps. So that might be another thing that you need to calendar with your executives or with your team. So
yeah, it's also a bigger conversation because the passwords are changing all the time. Like you have to change every 8 weeks or whatever. So it's like, this is a process is flawed. Why someone else needs to have the power to be able to like to be linked to your account. Like they should have at least had you in there as an authorized, you could have been the grant writer. There's like the different roles, so that you could have at least gone in there and created the workspace and set it up. And so I think sometimes too, it's more of like, I need to do more than just sit down with you and get get logged in. Like we need to make sure that like, should you be doing this? Should there be someone else that you trust that can help with this? Because that's just a repeat nightmare for sure.
Yeah. And we don't really want only one person being able to push that final button. If something happened, sick in the hospital, on vacation, whatever. I mean, it could be any number of things, but
no, it's a totally good point. It's we have lots of examples of that being messy as well. So yeah, doing what you can to just insist on it and making sure that you're getting access and sitting them down and getting in. So
it was really nice you talked about good cop, bad cop. I was using the term big stick. Not good.
Yeah, try out good cop, bad cop.